Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of Movie Geeks United. Cinematographer Checco Varese had early ambitions of becoming an architect, but the unpredictable journey of life lured him elsewhere. First, as a news cameraman for the major networks, then a prolific photographer of music videos like Dave Matthews' Crash and Prince's Black Sweat, and then finally to narrative works for screens both big and small. It's likely that the visual language of one of your favorite television series was devised by Checco. That's because he's particularly famous for shooting pilots, True Blood, The Strain, and Jack Ryan among them. On the feature film front, he's produced beautiful work for The New Daughter, starring Kevin Costner, Replicas with Keanu Reeves, director Renny Harlin's 5 Days of War, second unit work on Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim. He's worked alongside his wife, director Patricia Riggin, in multiple projects, perhaps most notably on the Chilean minor drama The 33. And his new film is one of this year's most anticipated, It, Chapter 2. We enjoyed a wide-ranging discussion with Checco, during which we covered a lot of bases. What's it like to collaborate with music legend Prince? How do you film 36,000 gallons of blood? And what are the challenges of visualizing what is sure to become a new horror classic? So what are you working on right now?
I'm doing a pilot for Amazon and Sony called Them Covenant.
You've done a lot of pilots.
Yeah.
Is it important for you to get on the ground floor of a series when it first starts?
I think there is something very appealing about being able to create a world and to create a vision in a world. And it's very challenging because at the end of the day, it's an hour of information that you create in 12 days, 15 days. So it's a little movie. Very challenging, very, very creative, and very freeing because you are, within the world you create and everybody else sort of follows that lead later. I find it very challenging and I find it very interesting.
Yeah, and what interests me, you go into a lot of very popular series and you shoot the pilot or maybe one additional episode, stuff like The Strain and True Blood and Jack Ryan, what have you. And then other cinematographers have to kind of follow your lead. But in the case of It, Chapter 2, the opposite is happening, where you are following Chung Hoon Chung, the DP of the first film.
Well as my colleagues that follow and do the rest of the episodes of a series, I hope they had the same freedom I had to respect and honor the work of the predecessor, but take ownership and make it your own, because you basically are writing the editorial of the New York Times the next morning. Someone else wrote it yesterday and you're just writing it tomorrow morning, hoping that the millions of readers will read it with the same passion that they read the one of yesterday. So I think, to answer your question in a very elliptical way, I think I think of myself as a chef. We all go to the same supermarket. We all chefs go to the same supermarket. We buy the same products, and we serve completely different dishes with the same sources. And I hope whoever continued the pilot, it was the same sort of flavor, but with the additional ingredients that each one brings to the table. In the case of it was very challenging for many reasons. I think Chung did an amazing job. I think the first movie is wonderful. At the same time, I don't feel this is a sequel, This is not, it's called It Chapter 2, but it may as well be in It Chapter 27 because it happens 30 years later, 27 years later. So the stories we follow are the stories of the adults, and the fears of the adults, and the nightmares of the adults. So, like the fears of the young characters, Losers Club in It Chapter 1 was a little more joyful, and it's the summer, no matter how horrific the summer is, nevertheless, it's the summer of these 12-year-olds or whatever the age was, were fulfilling the nightmares of these 40-something-year-old characters who have lived a very, some cases, wonderful life, some other cases, horrible lives, and we follow their nightmares and their fears. So therefore, It Chapter 2, it's that kid's game, a seesaw between two worlds. It's a seesaw of honoring It Chapter 1 and honoring the look, and especially honoring the audience memory of that look. And in that case, Andy Muschietti, our fearless leader and beloved director, was very, very precise and very specific. That look has to be the same. It's like watching the first movie, We match the hair, and we match the wardrobe, and we try to match the look and the camera moves to the first movie, so it felt like you were seeing for the first time a part of the movie you never saw, or a part of the story you never saw. And that was somehow fascinating because, as you say, I've never done episode 2 of, and somebody did the pilot, so it was quite interesting. By the same token, we created a completely new world for the adults. A darker, moodier, more romantic, more scary world in the adult world. So it was challenging. It was very challenging, I have to say. But it was, they're not big rewards, and they're big unless they're big challenges. So I like the challenge. I like the reward.
Of course, yeah. And it's interesting to me because as a cinematographer, you're like a lot of people on that crew, that entire team. You're assistant storytellers, and essentially, the decisions that you make have to reflect character, the character journey, character point of view. When did you realize you had a feel for character?
My background is a little unorthodox. I started, I'm an architect, and I started by coincidence being a camera assistant in documentary, and then a news cameraman, and then a documentary cameraman, and then a war correspondent. So my journey to it goes through the horrors of war and the beauty of people that are survivors and people that make the best out of their days. So I think, I've never been asked this question, so I'm trying to figure out, but I think my feel for character and for story comes from my documentary days. Comes from trying to be a fly in a wall in the Amazon River while people talk about their dreams, and indigenous people in Brazil or whoever was walking in the Antarctica when I did a documentary. So I think it comes from there. It also comes from being a filmmaker. I think filmmakers, we are sort of the memory of the 20th century and the 21st century. It's the art that has produced more memories. It's sort of like we're the writers of the 18th century, the Romanticism. We're the writers of the 20th century and the 21st century. It just happened to be a collaborative effort. But I think we're writing history, and to be able to write history, you have to understand it. You have to understand action to do an action movie, or romance to do a romantic movie, But it nevertheless, it's all part of the same human drama and human arc that we all follow.
tell me about your experiences as a war news cameraman, that period of your life.
I really never wanted to be a news cameraman, but I remember being in South America. I'm born in Peru and raised in South America, and I became like the National Geographic guy to go to, and I did several documentaries with them. And so I felt, oh my God, I'm going to move to Washington and I'm going to be the king of the hill, you know. Sure enough, I moved to Washington and the regime changed and people I knew were not there anymore and National Geographic had a revamp. So all of a sudden, I didn't know anybody and I wasn't the romantic guy that lived at the end of a telex line or a phone line. Mind you, I don't think there were faxes then. So someone said, oh, there's this small company that in Atlanta called CN something. Why don't you go and visit them? So sure enough, I went to CNN, and they needed someone in El Salvador by coincidence. And I ended up going to El Salvador and becoming a news cameraman. You know, I changed profession in the plane. There's nothing like a plane to change professions, actually, I have to tell you. So when I left was a camera assistant. When I landed was a cameraman, of sorts. And yes, I think being and mind you, this was the 80s and the beginning of the 90s until 93 or 94. It was a completely different world. There were not 24-hour news. We were doing pieces that took a week or two of research and shoot and then we'll end up with the best 3-minute piece you could do for the nightly news and Tom Brocco or whoever it was that I was working for, or the BBC or the Italians. And you had to compete with the other 20 pieces that night. And then the best 3 international pieces would go on air, you know, and it was a little documentary of that slice of someone's life or someone's death or someone's tragedy. And it was very, very, very rewarding. I'm not saying it's not rewarding today, but the advent of the 24-hour fulfilling news and information, it's a little bit different because then you have to feed a monster, you know, and the monster is very hungry constantly. So I think I was lucky. I miss now and then. I miss the thrill. Now and then I don't miss the fear and the nightmares, which I sometimes still have. But I think it's a wonderful, wonderful way of weaving your way into the narrative world, because sometimes you have to shoot from the hip and walk into a location and say, listen, I was wrong. I think we're ready. I think the sun is in the right place, and if we shoot in the next half an hour, this will look gorgeous. Forget all the lights I said we needed, you know. That possibility only comes from accepting what the world gives you, you know, the realities that are there, you know. Maybe it's not the most beautiful elite scene ever, but the actors are ready and the world is ready, and who are you to tell the world that they should wait, you know?
Yeah. And it also strikes me that you're in situations like that, when you're in the middle of a particularly scary environment covering certain events, you are capturing human moments in the extreme, and you're sharing them with the world. And I think there's something so profound about that. And in the long run, that's why we love movies, because we share a human experience with someone that we otherwise might not have known.
It's like being a kid in your bed and reading a novel, a classic, a Julio Verne or you know, Conrad. You know, you read and you become all of a sudden this explorer in the Arctic, and that's thanks to the writer. In the case of the film, and in the case of what we do for a living, we bring that little piece of passion, fear, horror, life, drama, laughter to the audience. And there is nothing better than, I don't recall a better experience than seeing a movie for the first time with an audience, and they laugh in very odd places, and they cry in very different places that you remember they should have. And that's the magic of sharing that,
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and that is fascinating.
It's you mentioned a little bit earlier that you set out to become an architect, and it strikes me that in terms of the contrast between architecture and cinematography, in both cases you're dealing with an understanding and a use of space. So when you visit a location or a set, does your architectural mindset come into play?
Oh, constantly. Being an architect, I don't recommend doing my career because it was very convoluted and contorted and complicated, but being an architect or understanding the flow of a space, understanding the colors, understanding where the light comes through, and understanding what people will do in that house or in that space or in that whatever, that prison, it's invaluable. Architects don't build walls. Architects build spaces. Cinematographers light spaces. Cinematographers embrace spaces. You understand when you go to a location or you build a set, there are some sets that work and there are some sets that don't work. And the sets that don't work, or the locations that don't work, are the locations that are counterintuitive to the human being, and there is a direction in locations, there is a direction in sets, there is a flow of movement in a set. There is the same flow of movement that you have in your kitchen. The fridge is to your left, the kitchen is to your right, and the stove is behind you. That's the very easy way in a triangle how it works, and that has been the same way for, 100 years. And I think it's invaluable the way you can understand that, besides the practicalities of looking at a floor plan and understanding, oh my God, this is too small, or okay, that's good, or is this window too high, or are we missing a window here? That's the practical part. But in the emotional part, it's fascinating how both professions intersect, at least in my soul and in my brain, how both professions intersect perfectly. If I were to start again in this world, I would start again as an architect and then move quicker to narrative, skip some of the things I did, but architect, it's a fantastic profession.
And it's in It Chapter 2. So much of the film consists of nightmares, nightmare scenarios, essentially. And in your nightmares, you can go anywhere. So tell me about those set pieces. What were the most unique or challenging set pieces to visualize?
Each Chapter 2 deals with adult nightmares, and it deals with these adults going to the core of Pennywise and trying to get rid of him, to kill him. There is a scene in the first film that it's called the cistern, where the kids come in and all the kids are dead and the bones and the mound of toys are there. And this large spaces is where Pennywise lives, and then is where Pennywise inhabits. And so Paul Osterberg sat with Andy for days and days, going through the details of it. I have to say that there are movies where the director is always in a movie. The director is the leader. There are movies where the director is tactile, working in every single frame of it, and this is one of those movies. Andy is fully responsible. Texture, the reflection, the sheen, without going into technicalities on how to do it, he would go and say, well, maybe that should be darker, or maybe that's a little too bright. What about doing this? And he learns, and he very, with a very gentle hand, tries to tweak the world to his will. And it's fascinating to see how the world actually tweaks to Andy Muschietti's will constantly.
That's interesting, because I'm sure there are different kinds of directors, but do you appreciate the more tactile visual directors such as Andy?
You know, I'm a cinematographer. I'm married to a director, and a very successful and talented director. We've been married for several years. We have a 12-year-old daughter. And every time I start a movie, I laugh and I joke and I say, well, I'm going to marry someone else now. You know, and you go in this journey of of discovery and romance and wedding and honeymoon and everything else, you know. And then at the end, there's the hugging and the separation, but it's not a divorce, it's a hugging and a separation. So every love story, it's a happy love story. So I mostly like every kind of director. I think one of the beauties of working with Andy is that he is very visual and very tactile. You know, he actually touches the frame metaphorically and tweaks it to his will. And I think that is fascinating to see. I mean, it's not always pleasant, you know. I'm like, oh my God, how do I do this? You know, it's like really? You really want that? Good. Let me walk around the set for a minute and I'll come back with a solution. But I mean, my job is to actually try and make those nightmares and those dreams touchable in the frame, you know, and that's the beauty of it. Right? When you finish, you feel like, oh my God, I did it. And then you go to sleep and you wake up the next morning and you grab a cup of coffee and you go, oh God, today will be again the same. So it's like climbing the Everest every morning and being very happy of not having died frozen in the pick. And the next morning, there you go. We'll climb the Everest again. You know?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I have a very geeky question for you, because Jessica Chastain revealed that in this movie, I think for one scene they used the most amount of blood ever used for a single scene in a film, and I'm wondering about the practicalities of photographing blood so that the color and the consistency reads. I mean, was there a lot of testing that you had to do to figure out how to do that?
Well, we had, and I say had because unfortunately and tragically, due to a working accident, Warren Appleby, the special effects supervisor, we lost him a few months ago. And Warren has done many movies with Andy and with me, and I wouldn't say he was a dear friend. I think he is a dear friend because he's somewhere building some weird thing in another dimension. But anyway, on a less sad part, yes, there was this place where she's part of a nightmare and no spoilers, and she gets swatted by 35,000 gallons, I think it was. I don't want to quote the wrong number. But it was like huge amount of blood. I mean, on the practical, geeky sense, I think there must have been some custom supervisor officer in the border between the States and Canada saying, what are you guys thinking? What is this, all this blood? What are you guys doing here? You know, I think someone must have asked some questions about that. But on the practical way, they had all the blood built on tanks above the set and connected with quick opening valves. So you would open the valve and as like Archimedes said, so the water tends to go in the lower part. So all this liquid came rushing down through very specific places into this area where Jessica was. Lighting blood, it's as tricky as lighting everything else in life. We did tests with a little bit of it, and we found the best color and the best pulsing. And then everything was fine, and everything was great, and everybody had a great time, and we tested, and etc. And then all of a sudden, Andy wanted a slightly different shot, and he couldn't reach it where the cameras were. So I went to the camera truck, I put the wetsuit, and I ended up in the blood with a camera. So some of the shots are these very sophisticated camera crane moves around where she is, and some of it are just your fellow cameraman inside the blood with a very visceral camera in the blood, in the liquid. The funny part of it is that a week later my daughter came to visit, and she goes, "Why is your hair pink? I have gray hair. So why is your hair pink?" And I'm like, I look at myself in the mirror and I realize that actually, yeah, it was pink due to all the blood I was swimming in.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was fun. It's like, I have to say it was a weird sensation. It's like swimming in olive oil. Not that I ever done it, but, it's just this sort of viscose sort of liquid that it's not wet, it's not dry, but it's like sort of weird.
I just have two more quick questions for you.
Yeah.
I have to ask you, because I was looking through your resume today, and for a period of time you shot some very notable music videos. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of them that you shot was for Prince.
Four of them, yes. 4 of them.
Oh, you shot 4 Prince videos. Do you have any Prince stories?
Yes, I do. Indeed, in fact, I do. It was my first time working for him, and so the assistant, the producer, everybody comes to me and says, he doesn't like to be touched. He doesn't like to have contact. But we want you to meet him on the makeup trailer. But please, 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 he really is sort of very, very distant. Yeah, I say, yeah, whatever, of course, And I completely forgot about that. Because I was working somewhere. Let's go and see him. And mind you, I was never a big fan because I lived in South America, so I knew who he was, but I'm not a pop. I wasn't aware of that, and that's my thing. He is and was a worldwide amazing musician, But to me, it was just the gentleman that I was about to shoot. So I went into a trailer. He was sitting there. He turned around, stood up, and I grabbed his hand, hugged him, and I said, "Oh my God, it's a pleasure to work with you." Put my hand around his shoulder. Tap the shoulder again, hug him one more time, and I say, "Thank you so much for the opportunity." I walked away. There was silence everywhere. Everybody was looking at me, and I'm like, "Oh, Jesus, I forgot what they told me." Got 2, I did all his music videos. I did 4 more. He became, I wouldn't say a close friend, but he became a person that would text, the assistant would text me, "Hey, Prince is playing in New York. Do you want to come?" And so I would go to him playing, I think, and then actually that day he walked me through the house. So I ended up hugging him against everybody's, prognosis, and we liked each other, and he liked it. So yes, I have that story, and I'm still in contact with the assistant, and yeah, it was tragic, but I remember always, how wonderful it was for me to forget that. And then he grabbed me by my hand and showed me the house and showed me the guitar and played for me, even when we were there, I'm like, wow, that's great. And I didn't, probably because I didn't quite, it wasn't like I was having an interview with God, I was having an interview with a with an artist, and I treated him like a human being that was an artist, and I thought it was fascinating.
That's absolutely true. I'm sure that he probably appreciated being treated like a human being.
Yeah, exactly.
It was probably rare among people around him. Yeah.
Probably yes, because they become idols, and
Well, my last question for you: if you teach, or if you were to teach a class on cinematography, are there particular moments from some of your favorite films, whether they're yours or someone else's, that you would show to kind of teach a certain lesson about cinematography?
I've done several workshops, and when I share my stories, I wouldn't go as far as say teaching, but when I share my stories, I start with a little shoebox, cardboard box that opens towards the audience or towards the students, so they don't really know what I'm taking out. And I say, this is what I want to show you. And I take a tomato, parsley, salt, olive oil, in another little jar, and I put them on the table, and I say, cinematographers are like chefs. We all go to the same supermarket, we buy the same tomatoes, we buy the same olive oil, and we all cook. If you give these ingredients to Dante Spinotti, he will do a fantastic bolognese. If you give these ingredients to Emanuel Lubezki, he will do a beautiful, beautiful salsa. And each one of us brings to the table what we have in our souls and in our lives. So that's how I start. It's very confusing for them, I have to say, but I usually get a laugh or two. I've used several times scenes from a movie I did that was directed by Patricia Regan. It's called The 33. It's about the Chilean miners. Yeah. And that movie was extraordinarily challenging because we shot in a real mine. So half of the movie happens in the darkest place on earth, and the other half of the movie happens in the brightest place on earth. And the brightest place on earth is the Atacama Desert, and the darkest place on earth, it's a mine. So that was an extremely challenging movie. And we lit all the interiors mine with practical flashlights. There were some lights here and there, but most of it, or 90% of it, were just flashlights. And I think that it's a way to understand cinematography. And I'm not quoting my movie, I just know what we did in that movie. Quoting what cinematography is, and cinematography is, many have said cinematography is painting with light, and it's true, but it's especially painting with the tools you have at hand. And that's why the analogy of tomatoes and oil are important. It's not about the tools, it's about who holds the brush and what kind of history you have behind that, and how many museums have you seen in your life, and how many sunsets have you watched in your life, and how many times you have been depressed because you missed the sunset. And I think that's what cinematography is. One brings its own experience to the frame.
Yeah, that is a beautiful way of illustrating what it is. And Checco, my friend, thank you so much for your beautiful work, and thank you for taking time out tonight to talk to me about it. I really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure, and thank you for being wonderful at asking questions, because that's a rare ability, and you have it down to poetry.